Leo and the red-haired warrior both rose to their feet, their eyes full of unwavering resolve. They urged their teammates to check their weapons and steel their minds, ready to charge into a fight with no mercy. Outside, the black-cloaked commander led a massive troop as they slowly advanced. He wore a cold, sinister smile, utterly convinced that the prey inside had run out of escape routes. Outside, the fortress was a total wreck, broken rocks everywhere, and dust billowing into the sky. A few figures were creeping around, carefully checking out the ruins. One dude stepped forward and planted his boot on a cracked stone slab. He stood there in silence, his icy eyes sweeping over every shattered piece of debris. In the middle of the chaos, a badly wounded soldier lay barely clinging to life, whispering weak pleas for help as he struggled to breathe through the thick, smoky air. The dying guy managed a soft groan, desperately begging for one more chance to be saved, his voice fading in and out amid the rubble. Nearby, a man with dark hair stood motionless, his eyes glowing red as he stared down at the struggling soldier, showing no hint of mercy as he silently watched. Then the commander signaled for his crew to report in. One of the soldiers said they hadn't found their target yet, they'd already scoured the west side and were now moving east. The cloaked leader reminded everyone that there had been no word from the ambush team. He couldn't help but wonder why the corpses of the white-armored dragon cavalry were nowhere to be found. He strode through the messy battlefield, silently questioning the bizarre disappearance of the cavalry's bodies. Raising his hand to halt the group, he asked if anyone had actually seen the white-armored dragon cavalry with their own eyes. Suddenly, the man in the black cloak spun around at the sound of a scuffle behind him. Two of his guys instantly leaped into action, stabbing and slashing to quickly subdue the sneaky attacker. Without a word, the man in black drew his sword and took up a dominant position on higher ground, clearly ready to land a fatal strike. His icy gaze made his opponent tremble. Out of nowhere, someone lunged forward, straining to hold on to the swinging blade. In a split second, a fierce counterattack erupted as both sides grappled hard. The clashing swords sparked with a burst of bright fire as they met in midair. The man in black spun around, slicing his sharp blade straight at his foe. He then unleashed a powerful kick that slammed into the enemy's chest, sending him flying back. At that moment, Evelyn leaped into the fray, twisting midair and unleashing a crescent moon slash with her sword, cutting cleanly through the atmosphere. She swung her sword down from above, using the momentum of her descent to pack extra power into every hit. The blade sliced straight through the air, crashing into her opponent below with a resounding clank that echoed across the battlefield. The dude in the black cloak stood among the rubble, giving a sharp signal for his troops to advance. The young warrior charged in, decisively swinging his sword to hit an enemy from behind and forcing the guy to back off. Meanwhile, a wounded soldier was frantically begging for help as his teammates quickly hauled him to safety right in the middle of the chaos. The commander barked orders that the enemy wasn't allowed to escape, calling for a quick reorganization to set up a fierce counterattack. Evelyn lifted her sword, her voice cold as she admitted that she had really hoped the traitor wasn't from the Central Intelligence Agency. She reminded everyone about the Ragnar clan's strict rules. There was zero tolerance for betrayal. Grating her teeth, she declared that the enemy would face execution, her tone leaving no doubt about her determination to crush any traitor to the end. Without missing a beat, Evelyn spun her sword and attacked. Sparks flew brilliantly as the blades clashed midair. The duel escalated into an all-out brawl, with swords colliding over and over, lighting up the air with flashes of brilliance. The man in the black cloak silently wondered how the white-armored dragon cavalry had managed to survive such a brutal onslaught. His red eyes burned with both confusion and rage as he couldn't believe they had held out after that ambush. Then a blonde guy charged in, swinging his sword with everything he had. He attacked hard and fast, determined to take down the enemy right in front of him. In response, Evelyn launched a fierce counter, slicing hard at the man in black. They clashed up close, tension practically radiating from their eyes. Evelyn spun around, using her leg to kick him straight in the side and push him back onto the rough, rocky ground. The man in black gritted his teeth, his face showing a fresh wound made him squint furiously, and his red eyes blazed even hotter with anger. The dude in the black cloak swung his sword non-stop, his blazing red strikes ripping through the air. He slid back on the rocky ground as dust and smoke swirled around him, getting ready to launch another counterattack. Evelyn shouted out, demanding that the Central Intelligence Agency stop resisting since she was sure they had no way out. A tall guy then declared that by the time the ambush went off, the enemy had completely lost any shot at winning. A red-haired dude smirked and said that if the enemy willingly surrendered, he'd even let them live. The commander in the black cloak roared, giving his whole squad permission to use their secret technique, determined to wipe out any resistance. A few of his guys, bare-chested and looking fierce, gripped their weapons tight as they braced for danger. One young man watched in awe as a burst of red energy ignited, silently wondering what kind of secret technique could unleash such terrifying power. Out of nowhere, a figure shot up from the ground, cracking the earth beneath his feet, a clear sign of explosive power. The red-eyed guy pressed in close, clashing swords that sent sparks flying everywhere. He roared as red energy surged around him, and in a moment of shock he muttered in disbelief at the overwhelming power. He then yelled out that it was the reverse blood surge, a forbidden move that drained life energy to unleash an instant burst of raw power. The ground exploded as rocks and debris flew everywhere. A violent shockwave spread out, hurling a soldier in white into the air, who cried out in pain as he struggled to keep his sword planted on the ground. Nearby, another guy with blazing red eyes widened his gaze, his expression cold and ready for the next strike. A group of red-eyed warriors leapt down from above, muscles bulging as they prepared to attack hard. A flurry of sword tips stabbed into bodies, blood spraying everywhere and painting a gruesome scene. One man was pinned down by a barrage of knives, his eyes bulging in excruciating pain as he couldn't react fast enough to the onslaught. A badly injured soldier gasped for a rookie to get out of there, his face all bloodied and utterly exhausted. In a daze, his red eyes scanned the scene in panic as he saw blood streaming everywhere. He gritted his teeth, pain and rage surging inside him, not knowing what to do in the midst of the chaos. He roared in anger, cursing the enemy for their brutal, ruthless assault. He swung his arm wide, unleashing his signature Triple Dragon's Claw as a fierce surge of blue energy tore through the air, launching a non-stop assault. A sleek blue interface popped up, signaling that his mind gate was active and cranking his power to the max. A burst of radiant blue light exploded outward, forcefully pushing enemy forces aside. He slashed his sword, effortlessly sweeping away the horde of figures charging at him. His blade glowed with a vivid blue aura, and the words Triple Dragon's Claw seemed to float in the air, a clear sign that he had reached his ultimate power level. Lifting his hand, his entire body became enveloped in dazzling blue energy as he prepared to deliver the decisive strike. The brilliant blue beam shot upward, swirling like a violent vortex, setting the stage for one final, earth-shattering move. Energy streaks cut across the battlefield, knocking enemies back as they tumbled down in a whirlwind of sword energy. One red-haired fighter stared in disbelief as his comrades were swept away, too stunned to even react to the raw, terrifying power crashing over them. A blonde guy braced himself to block the onslaught, while another took advantage of the momentum to clear a path, shoving aside anyone who dared stand in their way. The enemy's cries of despair filled the air as they were hoisted up by the blue force, their blood splattering as their bodies were torn apart. Debris and dust flew in all directions, stained red with enemy blood, as the entire battlefield trembled under the sheer force of this overwhelming move. The ground shattered into chunks and white smoke billowed up, obscuring the area while warriors scattered around, maintaining a wary stance amid the devastation. Meanwhile, the dude in the black cloak stood frozen in shock, realizing that his opponent had shattered the reverse blood surge way too easily. Panic set in as he growled under his breath, vowing that he wouldn't let his enemy live. His eyes, blazing red with fury, promised immediate retribution. The earth erupted into a massive crater as rubble and dust flew everywhere, a clear sign that the aftershock was far from over. A blonde fighter couldn't help but let out a smirk, while a nearby female warrior's eyes widened in amazement at the chaotic scene unfolding before her. The blonde guy muttered under his breath, questioning the extent of Theo's abilities, and then silently reminded himself and his crew that they'd need to push even harder. Theo panted heavily, sweat pouring down his face, as he admitted that repeatedly using his mind gate to boost his strength was taking its toll. Clenching his teeth, he recognized that the weight of his power was just way too much for his current state, leaving his body trembling from pure exhaustion. Suddenly, a shout rang out from above, calling Theo Ragnar, and making him snap his head up, his eyes instantly on high alert. A man roared as he charged straight at Theo, swearing he'd drag him down to hell with him. Theo noticed the enemy's mana twisting wildly in his body, dangerously unstable. Panicking, the enemy screamed, clearly about to self-detonate and wipe out everything around him. Then Theo's eyes widened as he sensed a sudden burst of green wind. A gigantic vortex, emblazoned with the floating words God of Tempest, Squall swooped in and grabbed the enemy, halting his reckless charge. The man howled in agony as the whirlwind slammed him, his body buckling under the brutal pressure while blood spurted out. Meanwhile, a female warrior got caught in that massive green maelstrom, which sucked in everything nearby with relentless force. She shouted out God of Tempest, channeling a storm of wind that whipped around her, radiating an overwhelming power. Ribbons of wind coiled tightly around her arms as she prepped to launch a decisive blow at the enemy still reeling from the vortex. Standing firm in the center of the storm, she unleashed Maelstrom, trapping the enemy in a furious cyclone that left him completely immobilized as his muscles tensed in vain. Theo's heart pounded as he realized that the Manhwa explosion was still a threat, and he feared the catastrophic fallout. The swirling green wind then roared to life, sealing the Manhwa explosion inside it and completely cutting off the deadly energy. The explosion lit up the sky in a blinding flash before dissolving into the swirling gusts. The female warrior eventually landed, panting but with a steely look of determination. The enemy lay crumpled amid the ruins, a bloody wreck, a tragic end for someone who had tried to self-destruct and failed miserably. Theo slumped onto the ground, breathing hard from the intense battle. As he lifted his head, he caught his teammates cheering, "Great job, Theo," though his eyes still betrayed his exhaustion. Everyone crowded around, pumped up that he'd delivered exactly when they needed him. The red-haired guy laughed out loud, declaring he was ready to be Theo's first blade, while a blonde grinned gratefully, saying they all owed their survival to him. Even the girl next to him bowed her head in thanks. Quietly, Theo gazed upward into the early morning sky, his eyes distant as if deep in thought. A small, satisfied smile crept onto his face, both a sign of relief and a bittersweet comfort after the brutal clash. Then, someone reached out, grabbing a wounded comrade's hand and pulling him up with trust and support. A few soldiers exchanged surprised glances, wondering aloud when they'd learned those killer special moves. One of them muttered that he knew all too well, it only brought more pain, hinting that the secret behind that power was something best left unspoken. As the sky slowly lightened, the towering mountains loomed over the battlefield, still cloaked in the dust and remnants of war. The break of dawn exploded across the horizon, heralding a new beginning that chased away the long, dark, and weary night. Amid the rubble, the sword stood tall, catching the first rays of the morning sun, a symbol of hope and an unbreakable will. The Rose Palace loomed against a gloomy sky, its towering spires barely cutting through the fading light of dusk. In one shadowy corner, someone writhed in suffocating panic, tears streaming down a face twisted in fear and agony. Across from them, an older guy with streaks of gray snapped back with raw fury, his voice booming insults as he glared at the other person, his clenched fists showing just how mad he was. He believed that the other person, clueless about their own true identity, had the nerve to pull something so bold. Meanwhile, a frantic servant cried out for miss when he saw his target being forcefully thrown to the floor, writhing in unbearable pain. The gray-haired man slammed a pile of documents onto a table and demanded to know why someone had stolen his seal. Clutching a paper bag tightly, he pressed on, questioning if the other even realized the fallout of ordering the execution of the White Armor Dragon Rider squad and the kid who had fallen from the Ragnar estate. In a fit of disdain, he tossed the paper bag onto the floor and mocked the fallen figure, accusing them of ruining the grand plan of the Troivens. The person on the floor screamed in panic, drenched in sweat and completely terrified by the older man's overwhelming rage. Then, a woman dropped to her knees and yelled that chopping off someone's head, despite the pain it caused Axion, shouldn't be so hard. Biting her teeth, she vowed to tear the kid apart, along with everyone involved, leaving no one behind. She kept shouting that this brutal act was the only way to ease her conscience and finally give Axion some peace. The gray-haired guy paused for a moment, his eyes landing on the figure collapsed on the floor, and in a shocked whisper he uttered the name Axion. Then, with a chilling coldness, he declared that the other person had the gall to forget their duty all because of one trivial child's death. With that, he landed a heavy blow that made the tension in the room almost palpable. His stomp echoed with anger as the one being crushed trembled in sheer terror at the sheer force of his wrath. In a burst of agony, she screamed out Axion's name, her voice choked with despair. The gray-haired guy, all icy and ruthless, declared that she had lost the Dragon Slayer sword, basically the linchpin of the whole plan, and that from now on, she wasn't even a Troivan daughter anymore. Panicked, she mumbled about the menacing glare right in front of her, so scared she could barely get a word out. Then she froze when she realized the eyes staring back at her were an exact mirror of her father's, and a wave of horror just slammed over her. Gritting her teeth as sweat and blood mixed together, her eyes burned with equal parts pain and fury. The cold dude snapped orders for her to be locked up since he considered her worthless now. He barked at his underlings to erase every trace of what had happened, while a servant scrambled, calling out for his master in a total panic. One of them even dropped to his knees, shaking and begging for mercy, promising to do anything if he could just be spared. All around, screams echoed and bodies lay scattered on the stairs, yet the gray-haired guy just strolled by nonchalantly, bitter over how his epic coup had gone to hell. Clenching his fist, he yelled that everything was falling apart all because of Theo Ragnar, and he vowed to personally take down the other guy, his eyes simmering with pure rage. Meanwhile, Theo sat on his bed, flipping through documents with a pensive look as he tried to wrap his head around the chaos. Later on, he picked up the Balmung, the infamous Dragon Slayer sword, and immediately noticed it was sealed, meaning it had to be unbound before anyone could actually use it. As he held the sword, a sudden jolt of energy zipped through it, making him jump and step back in shock. He cried out in pain, lost his balance, and dropped the sword with a clatter onto the floor. In a split second, the sword slammed into the ground with a deafening crash, digging deep into the floor. Calmly, he remarked that the sword wasn't called the Dragon Slayer sword for nothing, his face a mix of curiosity and respect for its raw power. Staring at his slightly trembling hand, he noted how the sword's vibe was completely opposite to that of the Ragnar bloodline. With a heavy sigh, he concluded that he couldn't actually use it until he figured out the mystery of the mystic hidden inside. He then began thinking about the mystics, those ancient relics from the mythic era that almost never end up in ordinary hands. In his mind, whoever could unlock and decode a mystic would snag some seriously extraordinary power, just like the legendary heroes of old. He even recalled his past life, convinced that Ed Troyvan had definitely gotten his hands on Balmung's mystic. Remembering the way Ed Troyvan moved back then, he started piecing together every little detail, desperately searching for a clue. He grinned, totally convinced there was only one spot that Ed had ever hit up to uncover some deep secrets. Reluctantly, he stashed Balmung away in the vault, figuring he'd swing by later to decode it while letting the sword chill for a bit. Just then, a knock on the door made him spin around, wondering who the heck would be dropping by at this hour. That's when Evelyn showed up. She bowed her head, apologizing for being late, and hinted she needed some one-on-one time. Even so, she still called him young master with all that old-school respect. A burly soldier soon stepped in to announce that the commander was waiting to see him, his tone leaving no doubt that this was serious business. The commander himself flashed a smile, clearly stoked that he'd made it back safely. Leaning in slowly, he admitted there was still something weighing on his mind. He then questioned whether he really wanted to bail on the mission, his voice dripping with skepticism. Sheepishly, he confessed that he'd lost a leg and even Rocinante, the dragon, during the last mission. Shaking his head, he murmured that he was feeling too old and weak now, and that he just wanted to go back home to honor his fallen squadmates. The commander chuckled, remarking that no one could ever change his stubborn mind, and eventually agreed to discharge him from duty. Grateful, he thanked the commander, his voice thick with emotion. After taking a sip of tea, he admitted that there was something he needed to say about the rookie, Theo Ragnar, though he wasn't even sure if it would be enough to repay a favor. He went on to recount how Theo had unlocked his mind gate at such a young age, a rare skill hardly anyone ever achieves. The commander was blown away, wondering if Theo had somehow crossed the line from being just a regular human into superhuman territory. He admitted he was just as surprised, stressing that Theo wasn't a born genius with an always open mind gate. Instead, there were clear signs that Theo had forced open a gate that was meant to stay shut. In the end, he concluded that this had caused Theo's energy capacity to skyrocket, so massive now that it was nearly impossible to describe. He noted that it far exceeded Theo's current abilities, creating a void that needed to be filled. The commander burst out laughing, affirming that they had to seize this chance to nurture and help Theo fully tap into his new potential. Wrapping up his story, he said that was all he could pass on to the newbies. With the quiet night setting in, it was clear that everything else now depended on Theo's own choices and hustle. The commander ended with a smile, firmly believing that only Theo could truly learn and master that crazy power on his own. Theo stood silently in his black armor, sweat still beading on his face and eyes blazing with determination. He faced the commander in the vast training yard under the quiet yet tense night sky. The commander had just given props for Theo's recent mission, but Theo played it cool, insisting that it was all thanks to his crew. With a knowing smile, the commander told him not to be so modest, then casually asked how far he'd come with his martial arts theory. Theo hesitated for a moment, unsure if the commander was talking about his combat skills, and eventually admitted that he actually felt more comfortable before jumping into a fight. The commander shook his head, making it clear he wasn't just talking about fighting chops, there was something deeper at play. Blocking eyes with Theo, he inquired about his sword. He wanted to know what kind of world that sword was carving out, a question that left Theo feeling pretty confused. After a brief pause, Theo confessed that he wasn't sure he fully understood what the question was getting at. The commander explained that he'd always been focused on following the tribe leader's sword, claiming that everyone did the same. Out of nowhere, he swung his blade, his eyes flashing with intense sharpness. Theo was taken aback as the blow sent him flying, utterly stunned by the raw power of that strike. The space around them shattered in a burst of crimson light, fragments and blood splattered everywhere. In a panic, Theo realized he was in Ghost Dragon's quarantine zone, a dark, eerie place pulsing with sinister energy. He remembered that this area was a far cry from the quarantine zone that Sword Dragon had shown him back before Stage 2 of the Awakening Ritual. Theo couldn't help but wonder if this brutal, red-lit realm was the very world being painted by the commander's martial arts, a world radiating fierce power. In shuddering, he felt an enormous pressure crush him, his heart pounding hard from the tension. Then, the commander declared that his sword carried demonic might, his voice booming through the bloody atmosphere. Theo's eyes widened in disbelief at the savage energy bursting within the incoming strike. In a fit of furious momentum, the commander spun around, swinging his massive sword with wild abandon, unleashing a vicious wave of killing intent right at Theo. With another swift turn, the commander unleashed a flurry of blazing sword strikes, the lethal aura swirling around him like a raging storm. He charged forward, pouring every ounce of strength into his powerful strikes, his sword slicing through the air with a fierce, howling roar. Theo stood there, frozen in shock as the attack closed in, his heart pounding hard as he realized that one tiny mistake could cost him his life. The ground cracked open as streaks of red light from the blade came crashing down like it was trying to tear apart space itself, forming a colossal fissure. Theo looked up and saw a torrent of crimson blood pouring from above, the oppressive pressure making it nearly impossible to breathe. A swirling vortex of red energy enveloped him, forcing him to fight with every fiber of his being against the chaotic surge of deadly force. The sword slashed through the vortex, carving a path through space and unleashing a brutal, overwhelming aura. The commander stepped closer, his voice cold as he asked Theo how he felt about this raw power. He stressed that this was the martial art of Ma Long, something far beyond normal comprehension. Calmly, Theo replied that this power was all about sheer strength and total annihilation. The commander nodded, affirming that this was the true nature of demonic, unfiltered, and brutally direct. With one sweeping strike, he split a massive boulder in half, demonstrating an attack that obliterated any obstacle in its path. He emphasized that his straightforward, all-destroying sword technique, bursting with explosive, devastating energy, was the very foundation of his swordsmanship, a stark symbol of death. The shattered skull left behind by his strike painted a picture of unyielding ferocity, showing that there was simply no escape for anyone who dared to stand in his way. Then, the commander turned his attention to the sword of Miss Plum Blossom, wanting to compare its style to that of demonic. Theo explained that her sword was radiant and beautiful, entirely unlike the ruthless destruction of demonic. The commander mused that this contrast was natural because her blade embodied the essence of life. He elaborated that the process of a seed sprouting and blossoming into a flower was a perfect symbol of endless growth, standing in stark opposition to death. He noted that Miss Plum Blossom's sword moved slowly, gently, and unpredictably like roots constantly stretching out. The blooming plum blossoms symbolized ceaseless growth, even if it meant bending under pressure. Theo realized then that this was the very theory behind their martial arts, and he was amazed that the two factions within the Nine Dragons could interpret swordsmanship in such dramatically different ways. The commander smirked subtly, his expression loaded with hidden meaning. He talked about life and death, violence and existence, and then wondered if these two ideas were really complete opposites. Theo hesitated, thinking maybe they were just two sides of the same coin. The commander whipped his cloak around as a swirling red aura gathered around him, creating a vibe that was both imposing and dangerously cool. With a sly smile, he hinted that things would be pretty boring if he spilled all the secrets. His tone was so loaded with mystery that Theo had to lean in to catch every word. Out of nowhere, a book materialized in Theo's hands. Panic set in as he stared at this strange object, not even having a chance to process what was happening. Clutching the book, Theo asked what it was, and the commander replied that it was the record of the debate between him and MS Plum Blossom about the principles of the sword. Theo was floored, wondering if this book held the hidden martial secrets of the two sides of the Nine Dragons. The commander admitted it was something extremely rare, then turned to Theo with a purposeful look, as if to pass on a vital message. Around them, petals fell silently from a lone tree, and a voice resonated that Theo had now become the disciple of both sides. Two majestic figures, Sword Dragon and Ghost Dragon, seemed to loom in the background, symbolizing the deep connection between them. Bold words confirmed that Theo was now a disciple of both Sword Dragon and Ghost Dragon, two opposing forces that somehow coexisted within him. This is the end. Please comment Theo below if you want to do next part.